In today's lecture, we will be discussing the role of productivity on economic growth. To motivate the ideas, let me show you the minimum wages around the world. So, in Australia, the current minimum wage around $16.88. France is $12.09, and in the United States, at this point of time, the minimum wage, which is the federally mandated, is $7.25. On the other hand, you can look at countries like Sierra Leone with a minimum wage of 3 cents per hour, India 28 cents per hour, Afghanistan 57 cents per hour, Philippines 61 cents per hour, and China 80 cents per hour. Now the question you should ask yourself, why minimum wages do vary so much across the world? Or to put it differently, why American workers earn more than Indian workers? Now one argument can be is that simply the cost of living is lower in India, so that's why Indian workers get paid less. Yes, it's true, cost of living is lower in India, but also even after adjusting for cost of living, till the wages in India is much lower than in the United States. Now, why the businesses in the US are willing to pay much higher to the US workers, uh, whereas the same businesses in India pay much lower salary? And there's an economic reason behind it, and that economic reason is labor productivity or productivity. And what is productivity? The value that each employed person creates per unit of his or her input. It is typically measured as output per hour of labor. The reason American workers are paid much more than the Indian workers is simply because American workers are much more productive than a typical worker in India. Because of higher productivity, that's why workers in US command higher wages. Always remember, you get to eat more if you produce more. Since American workers on an hour can produce more, that's why they get to eat more or they get higher salary. Now a question arises, why American workers have higher productivity or labor productivity? To understand this, let's get into the next slide. So first I'll start with GDP, okay, and let's try to understand how GDP is affected. Now GDP is affected by labor productivity, also called productivity. So higher the productivity, higher is the GDP. And what is productivity? Productivity is nothing but output per hour of work. So if you can produce more per hour of work, you have higher GDP. Now, question is, what are the factors determines labor productivity, or why American workers have higher labor productivity than workers in India? And there are multitude of factors, and some of the factors are workforce, human capital, physical capital, and technology. And I'll go into each of these one by one. So first, let's start with physical capital. And what is physical capital? So physical capital per worker is the stock of equipment and structure that are used to produce goods and services. What does it include? It includes tools used to build or repair automobiles, tools used to build furniture, office buildings, schools, etc. Now, typically, if you have higher access to machineries, you can be more productive. And one of the reason American workers or workers in most of the developed countries are more productive than workers in developing countries, simply workers in developed countries has higher access to tools or machineries. Here's an interesting fact about physical capital. It's a produced factor of production. And what does this mean? What is a produced factor of production? It means that it's produced by human being using output from the past. So any machines in this world is produced by human beings using the resources that's available. And that also gives us an edge because we can produce better machines, and that's why our workers are more productive. Now let's talk about the second important factor that affects productivity, which is human capital. Also, human capital per worker. Now, when I say human capital per worker, you take the total human capital and you divide it by the population. So when I said human capital per worker is the economist term for the knowledge and skills that workers acquire through education, training, and experience. So it's the body of knowledge. So when you go to college, you acquire knowledge. When you work, you acquire knowledge. And simply, the American workers have more knowledge than an average worker in India or any other developing countries. And that's why American workers or workers in developed countries are more productive. Think about the resources we spend on higher education or school education. This goes a long way in increasing something called human capital, a knowledge base of an average worker in a country like the United States. And like physical capital, human capital raises the nation's ability to produce goods and services. So more educated workers we have, better trained workers we have, more they can produce, and as a result they can command much higher wages and higher standard of living. Next factor that determines labor productivity is technology. It includes society's understanding of the best ways to produce goods and services. Now, technology may be available, but the society may not know how to use it. So, you can say technology, always in combination of human capital, go together in helping or boosting productivity and as a result, higher wages. And finally, workforce. This is the people engaged in or available for work in a country. Now, everything is meaningless if you have most of the people in a country who are not willing to work. It is also true in the United States that most of the people are willing to work. And we have seen when we discuss labor market in the lectures on unemployment, we saw how most of the people in this country are in the labor force, which may not be true in many parts of this world, especially in the developing world. So let's look at the US productivity over time. So in this graph, what I'm presented is US labor productivity. It's an index of 2009 equal to 100. That means compared to 2009 as 100, how it has gone. And we can see US labor productivity has shown an upward trend for a long time. And that's supposed to happen because to justify our higher salary or increase in salary, we should be more productive. If we are not more productive, we cannot command higher salary. So by having higher productivity, we do have a better standard of living. But at the same time, I would like you to understand that this increase in productivity is not always going up at the same rate. For example, productivity slowed down during this time. Productivity slowed down during this time. And these are the time when productivity growth rate substantially slowed down because of various reasons, which are discussed in another article that I shared with you for this week's lecture. Let's get a few more concepts related to the concept of productivity, and that's capital deepening. What is capital deepening? It's when society increases the level of capital per person. So if a society uses more capital per person, it implies we are having a capital deepening. And capital deepening applies to both human capital and physical capital. Mind you, if we have more education, then we have more human capital. If we have more machineries, then we have more physical capital. But both are capital deepening. Let me show you some data. This is what it shows the share of population who are 25 years older, have high school or college and more. And we can see for US, this is both is upward trending. That means we have more and more people who are graduating from high school. We have more students graduating from college. And as more and more people go for more and more education, which means we have human capital deepening or deepening of human capital. At the same time, today, under one third of US adults have completed a 4 year college degree. What does it mean? Which means that there's clearly a room for additional deepening of human capital to occur. Still, most of the people in this country don't go to college. So, since you are coming to college, you are one of those few lucky ones who are actively engaged in improving your human capital. As I said, if you have more human capital, there's a good chance you are more productive, and since you are more productive, you can command higher wages in future. And that, I believe, is one of the motivating factors for you to come for higher education. Let's look at physical capital per worker in US, if it's deepening as well or not. And what this graph shows is real US dollars per worker physical capital, and we can see it is also showing clearly an upward trend. So value of physical capital measured by plant and equipment used by the average worker in the US economy has risen over the decades, and it's rising at a very steady rate. However, the increase leveled off in the 1970s and 1980s, which were also times of slower than usual growth in worker productivity. And finally, we see a renewed increase in physical capital per worker in the late 1990s, around this time period, followed by a flattening in the 2000s, around this. Now, what happened in late 1990s is the age of the computers. We had Windows coming in. We had all this were playing an important role in increasing availability of physical capital, and as a result increasing workers' productivity. So always remember, the reason we have higher productivity simply because we have better access to education, better access to physical capital, and we are all working hard to increase our ability to produce more per hour of work, which is also called labor productivity. And because of increasing labor productivity, we have higher standard of living. So to increase wages, the best thing you can do is to increase your labor productivity.